She is a recipient of Guggenheim, National Endowment for the Humanities, Getty, and Rockefeller Foundation fellowships. She's also a member of the American Academy of Arts, past president of the Modern Language Association, the American Comparative Literature Association, the Association for the Study of Dada and Surrealism, and the Academy of Literary Studies. She is the author of numerous volumes on art and literature, including The Surrealist Look, Picasso's Weeping Woman, The Life and Art of Dora Maar, Robert Motherwell, Pen and Brush, and Virginia Woolf. And in another vein, I learned she's the author of Provençal Cooking, Savoring the Simple Life in France, and the Modern Art Cookbook. Now, when I learned that, my interest was really piqued. Did someone say French cooking? Welcome, Marianne. Derin Tanyol, the curator of the exhibition, has a PhD in art history with a specialization in 19th and early 20th century French painting. Her research has been awarded a Fulbright Scholarship, a Samuel H. Press Foundation Fellowship for Research Abroad, and a Bourse Chateaubriand from the French Embassy. She's the author of the catalog that accompanies this exhibition, and a catalog that accompanied the exhibition, Alton Brown, Strength and Solitude, which was on view next door at the Woodstock Berkeley Guild. She was a visiting professor at Wesleyan University and has also taught at the College of Staten Island, Hunter College, and the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. Recent curated exhibitions include one in Berkeley and an exhibition of the work of the renowned photographers Mike and Doug. In an interview with Brian Hollander, Derin is quoted to say, "As any revisionist history might hope, it would be ideal if in the wake of the book and the show, Georges Malkine was rightfully given his place in the canon. After viewing this exhibition, I firmly believe that Georges Malkine has earned that place." Thank you.
I've spent much of my life being told that I talk too loudly. So you put a microphone in front of my face and then I overcompensate. So does this volume work for everybody? Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Neil and the rest of the staff at WAM and the board at WAM for helping to make this show possible. I need to say a special thank you to Josephine Bloodgood, who is the former executive director and curator of the permanent collection here at WAM. It was she who invited me to curate the show a number of years ago, and it was she who brought the work of Georges Malkine to my attention. Abigail Sturgis, her catalog design is, as always, exemplary. Daniel Philippaki, who is one of the world's most dedicated collectors of surrealist art. He very generously funded the catalog for this exhibition, as well as a number of the more costly components of this show. He's far, far away in what is, to my mind, the world's greatest city, Paris. So I sent him a very heartfelt merci across the ocean. Very importantly, thank you to the Malkine kids, who are now all grown-ups. Monel and Gilles and Cheyenne and Fern have been very supportive of this exhibition from the start. Fern Malkine-Falvey, who is the archivist for the family estate, she has spent years of her life tracking down correspondence, documentation, photographs. She has interviewed Malkine's friends and associates from the Surrealist movement, and in that process she has compiled what is a really remarkable archive of over 40 volumes of work, of documentation on Malkine, and it really is the foundation for any further scholarship on his work. So I'm very honored to be able to call Fern a collaborator and a friend. that's Sonia Malkine. She was a brilliant resistance fighter and a singer-songwriter and an all-around beautiful and energetic woman. As many of you know, she died this past spring, and I know that she has a lot of friends and admirers here in the room today. I thought a good way to start today would be with a clip from an interview that I did with her back in 2012, just by way of tribute to Sonia and as a way of entryway into Malkine's career. The clip deals with Sonia discussing the ways in which she helped to bring Malkine back to painting after a very long time away from the easel. She's going to tell us about how she inspired him to get back to work. And I need to make a disclaimer that while I hope that my skills as a researcher and an art historian, I hope those are up to snuff. I know that my skills as a videographer are not. So that being said, I apologize for certain quality issues, and there's also a little bit of a sound issue going on here. So there's a little bit of voiceover at the beginning, which sounds okay, but when Sonia talks, it's a bit quiet. So listen good.
I had the pleasure of speaking with Sonia Malkine, widow of Georges Malkine, one of the original participants in the Surrealist movement in Paris in the 1960s. In addition to playing a formative role in Malkine's return to painting after many years away from the easel, Sonia has, since the 1960s, had a dedicated following as a folk singer in Woodstock, New York, where the couple settled after leaving France. We began our discussion with how World War II had impacted Malkine's ability to paint, and how Sonia coerced him to rekindle his artistic persona.
Yes, they did years. They did all. And so when we first came acquainted, I said, you know, I heard you're a painter. What are your paintings? He made this what painting is it? I said, what are the paintings? He said, and I bought the brushes. I didn't think about the brushes, okay, but I showed the whole brushes, and I bought it.
Did that work? I heard it just fine. The gist of that, well, it's too late now. I'm sorry. I'm glad you at least got to see her in action. We had a feeling that that might be a little difficult, and I apologize for that. But the gist of what she said is that when she met Malkine, she had learned that he hadn't painted in almost 20 years. She said, "What are you doing?" She went out and she bought him brushes and paint, and she says in this video that she didn't know anything about either of those, and she put it in front of him, and she said, "Go ahead and paint." And that's the sort of the punchline of that clip, and I apologize again. Rather than perpetuating what is a really overdone art historical cliche of the artist's wife as a muse, which maybe Sonia was, I think it's more appropriate to say that she gave him a wake-up call. And she really was his PR manager, his business manager. Malkine had absolutely no interest in catering to a clientele. Self-promotion was not within his realm of interests. He thought these were completely contrary to what artists do. And so he never became famous, as many of you here know. And he did this purposefully, in a way. And he is quoted late in life as saying that he tried everything possible to avoid the attention of my contemporaries. This resistance to fame was absolutely mandated by Surrealism's primary mover and shaker, its main theorist, its main organizer, and that's André Breton. Breton thought of success, whether financial success or critical success, he thought of it as selling out, and Malkine agreed with that. And Malkine is quoted as saying, "If the public likes something, you can be sure it's bad." The public is always wrong. So, given Breton's disdain for success, famous painters like Giorgio de Chirico or Salvador Dali, who Breton championed at first, they were as quickly excommunicated from the Surrealist movement for succumbing to financial interests. And Dali knew that Breton felt this about him, so his answer to that was this photograph with $10,000 bills stuck to his face. So de Chirico and Salvador Dali, they failed because they had patrons and demand for their work. Robert Desnos, who was Malkine's closest friend during his greatest involvement during the Surrealist movement, mainly during the 1920s. Desnos was a great poet. He was an improviser of Surrealist tongue twisters. In the 1924 Manifesto of Surrealism by Breton, he says that Desnos was able to speak Surrealist at will. And then he would go on to call Desnos the prophet of Surrealism. But by 1929 and the second Manifesto of Surrealism, Desnos was vigorously shown the door for having earned money with his writing as a journalist and as a poet. Earning a living with words was, in Breton's mind, and he said as much, it was an abuse of Desnos' critical faculties. So the point here is that Malkine's commercial failure, in the long run, was testimony to his success as a surrealist. And this is one of several factors about Malkine that led art historian and Malkine's friend Patrick Waldberg to call Malkine a perfect example of surrealist behavior, and that is what the show is titled after. From 1925 to 1928, Malkine showed at all of the exhibitions of the Surrealists in Paris, and on the left I'm showing you an advertisement where you can see Malkine's name in the middle of the page among a list of artists who otherwise went on to be great names in the history of art. Malkine did not. He had a very successful show in 1927 at the Galerie Surrealist. Almost every work sold at this show. To the likes of André Breton and to Louis Aragon and Nancy Cunard, who I show you at left, and the work at right I show you very briefly. This is Piccadilly from 1926, and this was purchased by the famous economist John Maynard Keynes. But instead of soliciting future patrons or additional venues in which to show his work, Malkine laid low and, in fact, skipped town. And by 1929, he was wandering the beaches of Tahiti, which is really about as far away from Paris as you can get without meeting Earth altogether. This is sort of my point, both with this show and with the 8 chapters in the catalog, that this departure for Tahiti was one of many acts of avoidance in Malkine's life, of what I think of as his own self-willed erasure or absenting of himself from history. That's really a key ingredient in his so-called surrealist behavior. So with that question of personal absenteeism at the forefront, today I want to focus on Malkine's interest in architecture, in architectural fragments, in structures, and in spaces, and those are always empty spaces. And what I hope to show is that these mysterious empty spaces to which Malkine was so drawn are never just spaces without people in them, but rather spaces that have been abandoned by people. These are paintings about absence, paintings about departure. But in some cases, we'll see that there's often a kind of lurking, invisible human presence in his paintings of empty spaces. The 18th century printmaker Giovanni Battista Piranesi is the only artist that Malkine described as being relevant to his own work. And he doesn't use the word inspirational or an influence, but rather just Piranesi was somebody that he could relate to. And at left I'm showing you an etching by Piranesi, who was known primarily for very detailed architectural renderings. He did a series of essentially portraits of buildings in ancient Rome. This at left is from his Imaginary Prisons series, which is a very hallucinatory series all told, including this particular example, and I don't think it would be too anachronistic of me to call Piranesi's work surreal. Writing about his attraction to Piranesi and the kinds of things he liked to paint, Malkine described, and I quote Malkine, big empty spaces, deserted apartments, great vaulted cellars, long successions of doors in unfurnished residences, certain staircases seen from the side, all without carpets, without decoration, and above all, without people. The work on the screen now is Malkine's Délivrance du Passeport, or The Passport's Deliverance, from 1927. As you can see, it contains a Greco-Roman bust, wearing a butterfly for a bow tie. Malkine was very adept at not just verbal puns, but visual ones as well. The pun here is that in French, a bow tie is called a nœud papillon, or a butterfly knot. What we see here is a distinctly deserted space. It's an unspecifically indoor or outdoor space, bisected by a wall, or, oh, where's my cursor? Well, there it is, wall, or stage. It is not necessarily attached to any particular architectural structure. It's just an architectural plane. And right here is one of those staircases seen from the side that Malkine had referenced as being something to which something he liked to depict. On the theme of desertion, I'm particularly interested in the chair and this overturned table, or perhaps it's a piano bench. Malkine was very drawn to pianos and piano parts, as well as chairs. And in this exhibition alone, which is a fairly small show, there are no less than 7 works that contain chairs and 4 that contain pianos or piano parts. But this chair and this table, to me, create that kind of absented presence to which I referred, because somebody turned that table over. And so what I tend to see here is a kind of injection of some kind of action, be it an altercation, be it some kind of violent act. It doesn't really matter what happened. All we know is that somebody or something was there, knocked the table over, and is no longer there. In a not dissimilar vein, I'm now showing you Malkine's Le Baiser, or The Kiss, from 1927. This is a painting that he characterized in a letter to his friend Roger Desnos as the first painting of mine that Breton loved. It depicts, as you can see, 2 chairs partially submerged in water with their backs to the viewer. And these are his signature chairs. His chairs never have arms, they're never upholstered, they're just very basic chairs. And we always ask, I'm always asked, Malkine's family, I'm sure, is always asked, why chairs? Malkine didn't leave us an answer, artists rarely do, but I think it's another way in which Malkine conjures a human presence, only to take it away in the same breath. Chairs are nothing short of literal translations of the human body. They have a back, they have a seat, they have legs, and those legs are proportioned to accommodate human legs. So he evokes that human form only to simultaneously erase it. The chairs and the kiss, and once I decided this about these chairs, I couldn't let go of the idea, and it may seem kind of whimsical to you, but they seem to me distinctly motorized as they're moving away from the foreground towards this mysterious, functionless, unspecific architectural monolith that comprises the whole upper half of the painting. And I now zoning in on a detail of that so we can talk about it a little more in depth. There are a number of internal clues in this painting that would suggest the structure's similarity to France's execution device, the guillotine. And the things that I referred to there are, for example, these footed piers, which are supporting vertical structures, for lack of another word. This plane here as well, with a door cut out of it, seems to approximate the hole through which victims took a last look at the world. And also the fact that we can't see the upper registers of this structure. It's cut off at the top. Suggests, in a way, a kind of constraining of our vision in the same way that one's vision of what is above might be constrained if one's neck were locked in the vice that is the guillotine. And I might not have any grounds for making this correlation if it weren't for the fact that Malkine himself had a thing for the guillotine. And the drawing I'm showing you at right is what he chose to illustrate the front cover of the catalog to his 1927 solo show. So that would suggest it was a fairly important device to him. Later in life, this work at Wright, done in 1966, this is called Abolished Chance, and there the chairs and the guillotine of the Kiss are brought full circle in this very sinister hybrid of the chair and the guillotine. Before Malkine started painting these distinctly architectural paintings, and on the right is the work that I'll talk about at some length in a moment. But before he started doing these, he read Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Leader from 1822. And as many of you know, thereafter he went on to engage in what would become a dedicated opium habit lasting until the end of World War II when he gave it up. But opium was a very fashionable drug among the Surrealists. De Quincey's book is a classic. It should be read. He charts his experimentation and ultimately his addiction to opium in very vivid and often very witty detail. And in his early stages of opium use, he describes, and I'll quote from De Quincey, he described hallucinatory dreams that were indeed chiefly architectural, in which structures and spaces proceeded with a power of endless growth and self-reproduction. Buildings, landscapes, etc. were exhibited in proportions so vast as the bodily eye is not fitted to receive, end of quote. And I wanted to give you a visual for that quote. At left is an illustration by Lawrence Chaves. It's from a 1932 edition of De Quincey's book. In other words, it's not the edition that Malkine himself read, but it, in any case, captures the hallucinatory nature of these architectural fantasies that De Quincey talks about, down to these skyscrapers rising into the sky and cut off by the top edge of the picture because they are endless. It's not surprising at all that De Quincey evokes Piranesi's imaginary prisons as being artistic counterparts to his dreams, and he specifically refers to Piranesi's endless staircases without balustrades rising higher and higher. So there's definitely something about height that's going on here. And it was Piranesi's sinister architecture that Malkine himself talked about being very relevant to his own formal and thematic interests. Whether Malkine actually experienced the hallucinations that De Quincey describes under the influence of opium, we can't know that. Malkine did not leave us a log of his opium experience, although he did at least let us know that he sometimes used it as a creative tool. But I at least want to suggest that his investigations of architecture and these sometimes limitless structures, such as we saw in The Kiss, and very particularly in the painting that's now on the screen, I'd like to at least suggest that they're psychologically akin to De Quincey's opiated experiences. The painting now on the screen is one that Breton owned. It shows a hexagonal space that is perhaps some kind of a room suspended in the darkness, or perhaps it is the interior of a tower. And very much like De Quincey's description of these vast, endlessly growing spaces, there is no apparent spatial limit to this structure. There's no ceiling, there's no vantage point, there's no spot from which we or whoever is viewing this room. Very much complicating that, or making it that much more disorienting, is this lamp, which is attached by a wire to something or nothing. And this, in a way, seems to harken back to the structures that the bodily eye is unable to perceive, that De Quincey referenced. Likewise, the trap door at upper left opens on a staircase. Nobody knows how many stairs are there. The building is as topless as it is bottomless. And at left, the door there seems to open on some kind of a corridor. We can assume it is an endless corridor. I refer to a removed human presence, which I suggest lurks in other works. Here, it is implied both by the vantage point. This is somebody's view of the space, and also by these very poetic human sheets of paper that are floating down from wherever up is. Or they could be floating up. It doesn't really matter. There is not really any kind of structured narrative in any surrealist work, not in Malkine's either. But in any case, the humanness of this is that these papers seem to be somewhat forsaken, tossed aside, let go. The last painting that I want to talk about from this early part of Malkine's career is an untitled one from 1928. And like the painting that we just looked at, it depicts a tower, this time from the outside, situated in this very barren, featureless landscape. And this kind of landscape is something that we're going to come back to later in Malkine's career. The tower is very strange and displaced as an independent architectural structure. It seems almost like it's been dissected from a crenellated castle wall and then planted rather lonely like in the earth here. And it has this rather incongruous, rather chipper. I should not use the cursor apparently. Oh, I know, I have a pointer. All right, where does it go? Anyway, you all see the kite, I imagine. This kite floating to the right side of the tower, attached to this window by a string. Do you all see that? Okay. Now, as all the paintings we've looked at thus far have been devoid of people, which was Malkine's stated preference. But of course, kites are operated by people. And here that the kite string is attached to some unseen kite operating presence in the upper part of the tower. It's attached to the same non-entity, if you will, as the wire in the lamp in this painting here. Meanwhile, the kite's tail, it hangs straight down as if no wind is blowing. So nothing, at least nothing we can see, is holding this kite aloft. I want to use this heart-shaped kite as a convenient symbolic transition into the second half of Malkine's career by way of his romantic life, Matters of the Heart. About 2 years prior to the kite painting, he became involved with a woman named Caridad de la Verdès. She was an actress and a libertine, a party girl, if you will. And at left is a photograph of her by Malkine. It's in Malkine's studio. At right, it's a photograph by an unknown photographer, but Caridad is the one at the lower right, striking a very friendly and welcoming pose. This was a pretty short-lived affair. I imagine Caridad might not have been very faithful, judging from this picture and other elements of her life. But there is on Malkine's notebook, which we have in this case over here, there is an endearingly high school boy-like doodle on it, in which he says, "Loving madly, passionately, since April 7, 1926, since even longer ago than that, the red-headed woman." In 1932, he married Yvette Ledoux, who was a French-Canadian dancer, and like Caridad de la Verdès, she was also something of a libertine. In the photograph at left, which is by Man Ray, you see Malkine and Yvette kissing, and below them is Robert Desnos, who is always recognizable by the dark circles around his eyes. It's been repeated a number of times in the historical literature that this is a photograph demonstrating the Surrealists' experimentation with homosexuality, and here is Malkine kissing another man, which would be fine, except for the fact that, as you can see in the photograph at right, despite her boyish haircut, Yvette was anything but manly. She died in 1945 of tuberculosis, and then in 1946, Malkine and Sonia, then Sonia Neal, met. And as I suggested with the not-so-successful video clip earlier, it was she who prompted Malkine to return to painting after many years away from the easel. He hadn't painted much since 1930. And in fact, during all of the 1930s and the early 1940s, he acted in film. And at left, I'm showing you a still of Malkine looking very suave. He's the one seated at the table. The Malkines moved to New York City in 1948, and then to Woodstock, actually nearby Shady, where Malkine spent much of his time working away in his studio. And it's here that he really entered on the most productive phase of his life. He worked in a range of subject matter and styles that varied from painting to painting, it seems. He did quite a lot of nudes. He did abstractions, including a number of sand painting abstractions that we have here in the show. And during this period, Malkine's work is distinctly more graphic, and if I can use the word, chipper, upbeat. And I, at this point, have to do what I hate when people do, and that is whiz through 18 years of Malkine's life, because I only have 40 minutes, and I'm specifically talking about architectural paintings today. So we've just leaped over many years of very dedicated, active painting to arrive in 1966, when Malkine returned to Paris, and there worked on a series, very much a series, the only series that he ever really did, of 40 paintings called the demeures, or the dwellings. And these paintings are emphatically the culmination of the architectural themes and concepts of absence and abandonment that he dealt with in his earlier paintings in the 1920s. Malkine's return to France after 18 years away surprised many of his old acquaintances from the Surrealist movement, Max Ernst, André Masson, André Breton, Louis Aragon, and so they organized a retrospective exhibition in his honor at the Gallery Mona Lisa. And the main body of new work that he showed at that exhibition is this series, The Dwellings, of which I have now two on the right. As a rule, they depict desolate, uninhabited, very improbable buildings, consisting of a lot of arches and multiple tiered roofs, bridges, of course, tons of staircases in the demeure. And as a rule, they have lots of windows, but very rarely do they have doors. And the ones that I'm showing you now are in the present exhibition. The one at left is the dwelling of Li Teipo, who was a Chinese writer, and the one at right is the dwelling of Maurice Ravel, a composer. The dwellings are named after, for the most part, composers and writers whom Malkine admired. And as a short list of some of the dwellings that he did, J.S. Bach, Victor Hugo, Erik Satie, Johannes Brahms, Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Bronte, and of course Piranesi and Thomas de Quincey. These are conceptually portraits, but they're portraits without a sitter. In short, portraits, paintings rather, involving a human presence without the actual person. They sometimes, as in the case of the two on the screen, they sometimes have shorthand references to that person's character. The one of Thomas de Quincey on the right is shaped like an opium pipe. The one on the left is it's an umbrella handle. Erik Satie was known for having a large collection of gray velvet suits and for never leaving the house without an umbrella. As a rule, as a hard and fast rule, Malkine's dwellings are consistently rendered in three-quarter view. What I mean by that is you can always see two sides of the building at once, with often I'm going to try this again and put me in. With the outer edge of the building at the right angle formed by those two sides of the building be that which is closest to the picture plane. And I hope you can see what I mean by this consistent three-quarter view in this composite and in other dwellings that we're going to look at in a moment. I think, in fact, I'll even say I'm sure, that this three-quarter format is very specifically linked to the European portrait painting tradition that endured from the Renaissance and through the 20th century, and that is what we call the three-quarter view, in which the sitter is posed halfway between a full face frontal view and a profile, halfway between that, so that we see three-quarters of their face. And we're just going to jump over Leonardo da Vinci and Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, because nobody's ever heard of them anyway. Now, these actual portraits, of which he did very few, they are, for the most part, profiles. And at left, I'm showing you his portrait of Robert Desnos from 1926, and at right, a 1956 portrait of a woman named Nicole. And I just want to fleetingly draw your attention to, in the painting of Nicole, to this mysterious, displaced architectural structure with, of course, a chair on top. Other than being an intellectual or musician that Malkine admired, he was himself extremely well-read, very erudite, and musical as well. Other than being that, the main requirement for candidacy in the Dwellings series was that the sitter is dead. And so most of the people commemorated by the demeure, the dwelling, are historical figures who very much predated Malkine's own life. But he did do several of close friends who had died during his lifetime. And so he did one of E.E. Cummings, he did one of André Breton, who died 1 week. He died in 1966, 1 week before the opening of Malkine's solo show there. He did one of Robert Desnos, which I'll show you in a little bit. And the one that I have on the screen is now the dwelling of Antonin Artaud. Artaud was an actor and a theorist. He was a great friend of Malkine's during the 1920s, when both were heavily involved in the Surrealist movement. And I'm showing you now at right a photograph by Man Ray, and at left a still from the 1928 film Joan of Arc. I want to say that Artaud easily gets my vote for best-looking Surrealist. Surrealist most likely to turn heads. Artaud had a very difficult life, including opium addiction, alcoholism, mental illness. He was in and out of asylums for 9 years. He was subjected to electroshock therapy, and he died in 1948 at the age of 52, which, as this photo demonstrates, it's a photograph by Denise Colomb, he looked far beyond his years due to just how tragic in many ways his life was. I will not at all pretend to understand the writings of Artaud. They are extremely theoretically dense. But the one thing I did pick up is that he talks a lot about magnetism. And therefore, Malkine has structured Artaud's dwelling as a gigantic U-magnet. On the left side of the building is this bird's beak. This is also a reference to writings by Artaud. He wrote an essay called Paul les oiseaux, or Paul the birds. It's a historical fiction in which Artaud describes his own personal identification with the Italian Renaissance painter Paolo Uccello, which means Paul the bird in Italian. And so in Malkine's dwelling of Artaud, he somewhat wittily references the mythical bird-like persona that Artaud expressed in this essay. There's also a highly tragic element in this painting, and that is at lower left. You see a rope ladder dangling from a balcony, and it doesn't reach the ground. And there are also no doors on this dwelling. And this would seem to be, again, a tragic reference to Artaud's own confinement in the asylum. And indeed, he wrote to Malkine sometime in the 1940s. He wrote to Malkine begging for assistance to get out of his misery in this asylum. And Malkine, who had very little money to give, still wrote to one of the asylum doctors asking how, if at all, he could alleviate Artaud's suffering. This is the dwelling that Malkine dedicated to his best friend in the Surrealist movement. This is the dwelling of Robert Desnos, which is also a prison-like structure similar to Artaud. And that perhaps is a reference to Desnos' own death. Desnos died in a concentration camp in 1945, and so at upper left, you see the gate of perhaps a gated watchtower from which the Nazis surveyed the camp. The structure at right is perhaps a gallows, and it hovers over a pit with one of Malkine's staircases, of course, and the pit perhaps references the mass graves of the concentration camps. And I will constantly say perhaps when doing this kind of a reading of Malkine's work. After I put together this presentation, I realized that it must seem terribly dismissive of me to give a talk in Woodstock about Malkine and to leap over the 13 years in Woodstock that he spent painting. I have not discussed any of his paintings while living in Woodstock, but I have an excuse, and it's a good one. My interest today is specifically in his paintings that address abandonment, absence, departure, empty spaces, specifically through architectural themes. But absence and abandonment were not in Malkine's realm of experience while he was living in Woodstock. He had a family of 4 kids. He had a beautiful wife, and at the right is an exquisite drawing, also in this show, an exquisite drawing that he did of Sonia. So the space in which he lived was anything but empty. And I think perhaps it's safe to say that there's a fairly straightforward correspondence between what Malkine painted and the times when in his own life he was living a more secluded and insular life versus the times when he was daily surrounded by people and family. When, as I had mentioned during the brief scan I did of his work in Woodstock, the paintings during that period are distinctly more upbeat. Malkine was a romantic, sentimental person, which is very hard to believe on some levels, but I think the slide that I have now on the screen might suggest that on some levels. This is a list of 77 dwellings that Malkine either did or planned to do. And at the upper right, I'm talking now about this section here. At the upper right, there is a list of demeures, or dwellings, that are conceptually independent from the rest of the series. These are dwellings that are not of people, but rather of experiences and of psychological states. And we have here, very importantly, the demure of absences, and just below that, he crossed it out, but that's the demure des absents, or absent people. Working our way up the list is the dwelling of justice, poetic license, outdated love, absences of the possible, of imaginary love, of the opium addict, of serenity, and of le voyage lacunaire, the lacunar voyage, the incomplete voyage, a voyage with gaps and missing pieces, which is certainly a poetic metaphor for Malkine's own restless life of traveling and stopping at one place for a while and moving on to the next. He very much lived according to the spontaneity that André Breton, in his 1924 manifesto, would champion as, and it's what I'm about to quote is not Breton on Malkine specifically, but on what makes a surrealist a surrealist. Breton says that he loves the pure surrealist joy of the man who sets off from whatever point he chooses along any other path save a reasonable one and arrives wherever he can. End of quote. So this 1966 solo exhibition of Malkine's work in Paris included a catalog of essays by, among others, Louis Aragon, André Masson, Simone Collinet, who was Breton's first wife, and it included also a commemorative drawing by Max Ernst, which I show you at right. All of the essays and this drawing make very unveiled references to the feeling that Malkine had returned from the dead. He had been presumed dead by many, and he was very much complicit in that assumption, having left for the United States, stayed in touch with nobody, left without a word. He was very much out of touch, and so his return was treated as a resurrection of sorts. And Malkine, after reading the essays in the catalog, he told his friend Patrick Wahlberg that he had the not unpleasant sensation of reading my obituary. The last line of this list of demeure that I showed you a moment ago, the last line is ma demeure, my dwelling, which of course is a project impossible to fulfill because by definition the dwellings are of dead people. So it takes no great leaps of brilliance to see this as Malkine's own acknowledgement of his own coming death, of his own immortality, and he died a year after this list was completed. I wanted to close with a quote from Malkine in a letter to Patrick Wahlberg, in which he describes, very sadly, but not without the kind of irony that planning to, at least theoretically planning to paint his own dwelling would indicate. He describes the quiet that he felt as he prepared for his own ultimate absence. And I quote, "As for myself, I will not say I feel full of pep. I'm hibernating morally and physically. Life's saddest moments are up until the age of 65. After that, senility starts to take over. Little by little at first, and then it becomes more pronounced. And then it starts to administer the merciful sedation of absolute stupidity." That was almost the last line of the letter. He then closes on pianissimo and piano, these being the musical expressions for when the music gets quiet. And I had also attempted to use one of the bells and whistles that is PowerPoint. I had done a beautiful job of fading out that picture, timed precisely to go with when I said pianissimo. I failed, so that is the end of my talk. Gives her presentation, and so please join me now in welcoming the distinguished Dr. Marianne Hoff.